Today we're going to start talking about the skeletal system. The parts of the skeletal system include your bones, of course, and then the joints where bones connect to other bones, cartilages, which are oftentimes extensions of bone, and ligaments, which hold bones together. And there's two subdivisions of the way the skeleton is divided. So there's the axial skeleton and the appendicular skeleton. We'll be talking about both of those in detail in a different lecture. The function of your bones includes supporting the body, protecting your soft organs. Some of your most important organs are your nervous system. So the skull protects your brain and the vertebrae protect your spinal cord. You also have the rib cage, which protects the organs inside of your thoracic cavity. Your skeleton also allows you to move, and that's because you have muscles attached to your bones that pull on your bones and cause them to move in specific ways. Your skeleton also is able to store minerals and fats. Minerals that it stores that are sort of the most important are calcium and phosphorus. And then fat is found in the marrow of the bone. So if you've ever had like bone marrow at a meal when you eat a piece of meat that has the bone in it, bone marrow is in fact edible. It's just fat that's stored there. And then bones are also the site of hematopoiesis, which is blood cell formation. So your blood cells are formed in some of the red marrow found in your bones. The adult skeleton has 206 bones, and there's two basic types of bony tissue. So there's compact bone, which has a very homogeneous appearance, and then there's also spongy bone that has lots of small needle-like projections and many open spaces. So it does, in fact, look kind of like a sponge. This cross-section of the skull bone shows both spongy bone and compact bone. So the compact bone forms the two outside layers. It's kind of a sandwich, and then the spongy bone is found in the middle, and it's where it's open and the bone has a lot of holes running through it. The shape of bone gives them sort of some different classifications. So you have long bones, short bones, flat bones, and irregular bones, and we'll talk about each of those types in the subsequent slides. Long bones, not surprisingly, are typically longer than they are wide. They have a shaft with heads that usually form joints at both ends. They contain mostly compact bone, and so that's what makes long bones very strong. All of the bones of your limbs, so your upper arm, forearm, your feet, your thigh, and your lower leg are all compact bone, long bones. The exceptions are the little bones that are in your wrist, your ankle, and your kneecaps. So those are not long bones. Examples of long bones would be like your femur, that's the thigh bone, your humerus, that's the bone in your upper arm. So in this image, you can see an example of a long bone. So the humerus is one of those, that's the bone that's in your upper arm. But long bones also include the bones in your forearm, so that'd be the radius and ulna, your femur, your tibia and fibula. All of the bones in your fingers are long bones, and in your feet. Short bones are generally somewhat cube-shaped. They're not longer than they are wide. They contain mostly spongy bone with a compact bone covering. These include the bones of the wrist and the ankle. So those are referred to as carpals and tarsals. This also includes the sesamoid bones, which in humans are your patella. Those are the bones that make your kneecap, and they form within a tendon. So in this diagram, you can see where short bones are located. So they include these bones that form your ankle, these bones that form your wrist, and then also your patella on both sides of your knees are short bones. Flat bones are thin, flattened, and usually curved. No surprise that they're flat. They're made up of two thin layers of compact bone, and they sandwich or surround a layer of spongy bone. And examples of flat bones include your skull, like the image we looked at before. Your ribs are flat bones, as is your sternum. So we saw this picture before, but it gives you a good idea of what flat bone looks like. There's compact bone on the outside and the inside of your skull, for example, and then sandwiched between that is a whole bunch of spongy bone. Here you can see where those bones are located. So an example, of course, is your sternum, which is found in the center of your thoracic cavity, but then your ribs are also flat bones, as is your skull. Irregular bones are called that because they have an irregular shape. So they are not flat, short, or long bones. So they don't fit into any other category, so they got their own. So examples would be like vertebrae and the bones that make up your pelvis. So vertebrae have this big body, but then they also have all of these processes, and so they're difficult to classify, so they have been classified as irregular bones, and they're found in your vertebral column. And then another example is the bones of your pelvis, and those bones also have very irregular shapes, and so they are not called any other thing but irregular bones. Long bones always have a similar anatomy across the category. The diaphysis is also known as the shaft of the bone, so it's the longest part of the bone, and it's made of compact bone. That makes the diaphysis of these bones very strong. The epiphyses are at either end. So epiphysis is singular, that's one end of the bone. Epiphyses is plural, and it's the ends. They're mostly composed of spongy bone. They do have a compact bone covering, however. So in this diagram, you can see what a long bone looks like. So the diaphysis is this long central portion, and then the epiphyses are at the top. So there's a proximal and distal epiphysis in this bone specifically. This is the humerus. At the ends of the bone, they have articular cartilage because they form joints with other bones. And you can see in the epiphyses how there's spongy bone, and the long bone has an open space in the center, but it's surrounded by this compact bone. And it's a fairly thick layer of compact bone, which makes, again, these bones very strong. The covering of the diaphysis is called the periosteum, and it's just fibrous connective tissue that is on the surface of a bone. If you've seen a dried bone, this is usually missing. It's secured to bone by perforating or Sharpie's fibers, and so they just secure the periosteum to the bone. And then your bone also has a lot of arteries because bones have a very good blood supply, and that supplies the bone with nutrients. So in this diagram, you can see the periosteum, that's this covering here, and then you can see the Sharpies or perforating fibers that are here that are attaching it to the surface of the compact bone. And then on the surface of the bone and within the bone are all of these blood vessels. You can see all of those that feed the tissue of the bone. And they also, as you can see in this diagram, travel through the bone so that the cells within the bony matrix also get nutrients. At the ends of long bones, you have articular cartilage, and that is where one bone articulates with another bone. It's made of hyaline cartilage, and its job is to decrease the friction at joint surfaces. So at the epiphyses, again, remember there's a lot of spongy bone, and then there's a layer of compact bone, and then a layer of articular cartilage that's represented here in blue that helps the bone have a friction-free joint. Towards the epiphyses of long bones, you also have something called the epiphyseal plate. This is an active area of growth in children, and it's made of hyaline cartilage, and it helps the bone to grow longer. Once you've reached your adult height, the epiphyseal plate converts to bone, and it's called the epiphyseal line. So you can see the epiphyseal line in adults, and that's where bone growth used to happen. In this diagram, you can see where the epiphyseal line is. This is an adult bone. If this was a child's bone, that would be an active area of growth, and it would be made of cartilage. Inside of a long bone, you have something called the marrow or the medullary cavity, and it's a cavity inside the shaft of the bone or inside of the diaphysis. It contains yellow marrow, which is primarily made of fat in adults. In infants, because they have smaller bones, that space is also used for blood cell formation, so it's filled with red marrow, and it changes to yellow marrow over the life of a person as they mature. In adults, the red marrow, where you make red blood cells, is situated in the cavities of spongy bone and in the epiphyses of some of your long bones. So the site of blood cell formation changes a little bit as you grow older, but it always occurs in red marrow, and the red marrow moves or is no longer present in the diaphysis of adult long bones. So here you can see the medullary cavity, so that's this area. The yellow represents the fat that is stored there, and hematopoiesis, or red blood cell formation, occurs in the spongy parts of the bone. Bones have something we call bony markings, and they're just the surface features of the bone. They are often sites of attachment, and that's where muscles can attach to the bone, where a tendon could attach to the bone, or where a ligament could attach to a bone. They also are passageways for nerves and blood vessels. There's several different types of bone markings, so a projection, or something that sticks out from the bone surface, is also called a process, and they oftentimes begin with the letter T. Depressions or cavities, which are indentations or holes through the bone, oftentimes begin with the letter F.